So we've got an interesting list of questions here, Nigel. The first one was, did you ever really think that Red Bull wouldn't be on the grid in 2016?
I really didn't. Maybe I was wrong. It struck me from the very beginning. It was all terribly theatrical. This constant attacking of Renault and doing it very publicly, and the fact that it was obviously on orders from Mateschitz because he was doing it too. So I didn't really know where they were going with it, but the other thing I thought was Bernie will never let Red Bull disappear, whatever, come hell or high water.
Absolutely, they do an awful lot for Bernie's promotion from basically promoting the sport almost single-handedly. I think there was probably something else going on behind the scenes. I don't think we had all the pieces of the jigsaw, but I think what was even more extraordinary than Mateschitz attacking Renault was the demands he made of Ferrari before they'd even begun talking.
Yeah, absolutely, and then coming out with all this stuff afterwards about how it was, he was offended that Ferrari would not supply him with 2016 engines. Which, of course, last week prompted Marchione to come out with the fact that it was offensive that Red Bull should
quite expect
assume that it had the right to a state-of-the-art engine.
Yeah, I think these points were being made for political reasons in the bigger picture. I don't really, in hindsight, I don't think there was ever really a prospect of them not being there.
No, I agree. It was just interesting as time went by. It became more and more obvious, didn't it, that in the end they were going to slide back to Renault.
Yes. And then what happens at the end of this year? Because the Renault contract runs until the end of this year. So.
Yeah, I know. Well, who knows? I mean, someone I trust said to me that he'd been told by someone at Red Bull, it's Renault in 2016, Ilmore in 2017.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Who would you expect to fill the top 6 places on the grid in Melbourne? You think it might be a Merc in there somewhere?
I think, yeah, all right. Hamilton, Rosberg, Vettel. Actually, it's interesting, isn't it? You don't
what
automatically
after that?
you say,
automatically
maybe Kimi, but you wouldn't you wouldn't assume it.
No, Ricciardo maybe.
Yeah, logically, yes, Ricciardo, and maybe Fiat. Who knows?
Be nice to think it would be Alonso or Button.
It would be lovely to think it would be a McLaren. Absolutely. I've got my doubts, I must say. I think they'll have a much better year. They have to have a much better year. But whether they'll be whether they'll be in Q1 as a matter of, assumption as you would expect McLarens to be, I don't know.
We sort of touched on it in the podcast. I think their early season prospects of the Honda on great, but I would hope that now that we're allowed development through the season, I think there may be something significantly better coming, but obviously they've got a long way to catch up.
Yeah. And I think they'll have to be, don't you? Because if it really doesn't work next year, can you see Alonso being there in 2017?
I really can't. And it's a shame because if you say there are, in terms of the top teams, top well-financed teams, we have probably 4. We have Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull and McLaren. 2 of those have effectively been taken out of the equation in the last 2 seasons.
Absolutely, they have.
And you've got these fantastic drivers there. You've got fantastic facilities, fantastic talented engineering groups.
Sure.
But they've been neutralised. So would really like to see Renault and Honda get up there.
Absolutely. And the other thing with McLaren is, they have an enormous driver salary bill.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you look at the state they must be in relatively, the state they must be in financially. They have no big sponsors. They have lost a lot of sponsors, not major sponsors, but they've lost a lot of sponsors. They won't be getting much money from Bernie this winter.
No.
So it's interesting. Martin Brundle was telling me when he was there, McLaren had 14 sponsors that they had to allocate to other teams like Jordan and McLaren because they clashed with sponsors they already had. And they were just awash with cash. And it's not like that now, so difficult times for them.
Well, Ron saying he believes that you need to be a factory team to challenge for titles. Do you think that is the case?
I do, don't you? Yeah. I think, earlier on when we were doing the podcast, Pat made the point that, in 2009, Braun won the World Championship with Jensen, and they were a Mercedes customer, and they beat McLaren, which was then the Mercedes partner, which, of course, is something else, Ron Dennis never forgave Martin Whitmarsh for, because Whitmarsh, thinking of the best for Formula One, persuaded Zetscher to supply Ross. So it can be done, but
they were unusual circumstances.
They were very unusual circumstances.
That car had been conceived with the full backing of Honda.
Yeah, that's right.
With all the wind tunnel time, etc., etc. And then
and all that. About the double diffuser and everything else in the early part of the year when they won everything.
It was very convenient for the governing body for the privateer car to be competitive at that time. That might not have been allowed otherwise.
No.
And of course it combined a good car with the Mercedes engine as well, which was going to be stuck with the Honda engine otherwise. So, although Ross does say that actually what was coming for Honda,
he's always been sure that Honda was going to
be good anyway.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. But I think fundamentally, I think you need to be an engine part. You need to have an engine partner rather than an engine supplier.
Indeed, yeah. So we've got a question saying the technical from someone saying it's Diego Sanchez saying the technical side of F1 bores me. Am I in for a long ride in the future?
Well,
I'd say probably Diego.
I don't think there's any doubt. I think there's any doubt about that. I think if
maybe
you
need to watch football or something. I don't know.
So, but I think I don't know how old you are, Diego. But if you sort of long for a return to the days when Formula One was sort of fundamentally a mano a mano thing between the two blokes in the cars, I think you're going to wait a very, very long time ever to see a return of that.
It's even when a driver could make more of a difference, sort of pre-downforce days, you didn't have drivers winning races in bad cars. There's always the difference between the cars, the technical differences between the cars has always been a more dominant feature than the difference between the drivers.
It has. And actually, all right, I'm a huge Alonso fan, as everybody knows, but you look back now to those years he had with Ferrari, and you do think those were probably the last races won, actually quite frequently, by a car which should not have won the race.
Yeah, every now and again.
You don't see any sign of that now, do you? Some of those races, all right, I know circumstance played a part, but you think of, for instance, that win in Malaysia, when Perez, remember, in the Sauber was a hugely quicker car, and the Ferrari at that time had been pretty disastrous in pre-season testing, and yet there we were, second race, and
I think
somehow he contrived to win with it.
Yeah, I think he qualified at 10th on that occasion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's the technical side, I think, will always be dominant, but it's only because, and I think this is a point that often gets missed. People assume, therefore, that the driver is not important. It's only because the drivers are all so uniformly excellent that the car matters so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day, a great fan, and in his view, the great turn-off about contemporary Formula One is there can be quite a battle going on the track, but it's accompanied by very often a sort of flat, toneless voice telling Lewis or telling Seb or whatever, do this, do that, and it's always in this right, Lewis, now go to, etc., etc. And it doesn't exactly add to the excitement, does it?
No.
And it adds to this perception that almost they are driving by numbers.
And there's no reason why that needs to be there. There's no reason why it needs to be controlled by a team once the race starts. It's just something that's evolved, and it could be stopped. And it wouldn't be anti-technology or anything like that. It would just be, we don't want this. We want the drivers to be full in control. And I think the teams get so focused on optimizing everything to the nth degree, to making everything as perfect as it can be. That's the most efficient way of running a race, therefore that's what we do. That they've lost the big picture. They've lost the bigger picture of, well, what are we here for? We're here to make an entertaining series, and it is so... It's not just killing the entertainment because it's making everybody optimized, but it's philosophically it's awful, because you don't want to think that the driver's not making these choices. You want the driver to be taking chances and doing it on the hoof.
Absolutely. I don't know about you. I mean, I would ban radios tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd ban radios, and I would ban tyre warmers instantly.
Yeah, certainly radio. I don't think there's absolutely no problem with that. Yeah. This intriguing question here is from Kid Bruff is, choose 2 drivers from any era for your fantasy F1 team. Who would they be? We might end up with the same people here, so you go first.
Well, I'm not sure. It depends on what basis we do it. I mean, if you do it on a sort of with a measure of emotion as well as logic, I would choose Chris Amon and Gilles Villeneuve. Amon, because as far as I was concerned, he was one of the great artists in a racing car. I'll believe that forever. And it's interesting, for instance, recently that Howden Ganley was asked who's the best pure driver you ever raced against, and he said Chris Amon.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting. But I would have Chris also, because in all these years I've been doing this, he was the driver I most liked. He was just a proper bloke. Really, really good guy, and very good fun, as well as being an artist. And Gilles, a little bit the same. I mean, not only the most exciting driver I've ever seen in a racing car, and I will always believe he's the fastest racing driver there's ever been. But also, on top of that, a real quality human being out of the car, with a great sense of humour, great fun to be around. And it's interesting, actually, thinking about it, it's only just occurred to me that in fact Chris's career ended with Gilles, because the Can-Am car he had that he gave up driving, and who can I put in the car now? And then people said, well, you should think about this kid in Atlantic. And he put him in the car, and of course, predictably, Gilles was heroic with it. But it always struck me, it didn't surprise me in the slightest, those two absolutely hit it off instantly as soon as they met each other, and I can understand perfectly why.
Yeah. For me, I would put Gilles in, no question. If it was my team, or if I was just an onlooker, it would change my choice of the other driver. If it was, if I was an onlooker, I'd like to pair him with Ayrton Senna, because I think there'd be some fantastic fireworks there. If it was my team, I don't think I'd be able to handle it. So I'd probably look to pair him with someone of a different style and character. Probably Jim Clark or Alain Prost, some of that, one of those two.
Yeah.
That for me, that would be the ultimate.
I think you're probably applying a lot more logic than I am. I mean, I can understand perfectly either of those, Jim Clark or Prost.
But I think the perceptions of the Senna and Villeneuve are very different, because obviously his career didn't play out quite in full, but we got the pretty much the whole picture with Ayrton, whereas Gilles was cut very short. And I think circumstances have sort of coloured that, and had we saw what Ayrton was like when he didn't have a fully competitive car, and he could pull occasional miracles out of the bag. But I think had he been given a dog of a car like Gilles was given, say, in 80 or 81, there would have been a lot more incident of the sort we saw from Gilles. And so I think really they were very similar in their approach.
Oddly enough, I always felt it came more easily and more naturally to Gilles than it did to Ayrton. You would watch, coming up to qualifying, you would watch Ayrton be sitting in his car, and it was almost as if he were trying to work himself into a kind of trance. And you talk about nobody go near him, nobody interrupt this moment. I remember Jackie Stewart saying once, seeing him like that, and he said, you look at his eyes, and he said it was almost, it was almost as if he were on coke or something, and he obviously wasn't, but he was in another world. And I remember at Imola in '81, I was in the Ferrari pit during qualifying. Gilles' car was in the pits, and he was in the car. He never got out of the car the whole session, and he was actually asleep. And this is in the middle of qualifying, and Foghieri tapped him on the top of the helmet, and he sort of came to like that, and then they fired at the end, and bang, and gone. And within 2 minutes, he was on pole.
Yeah.
So it was. What I'm saying is, really, Gilles didn't have to think himself into it. It was such a natural process with him. But people will argue about this forever, won't they?
Yeah.
But you and I are probably unique in thinking. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would place Gilles on pure raw ability. I would place Gilles ahead of Senna.
I probably would as well. Yeah. For much the same reasons. But it's a very controversial view to hold.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know that. I know that.
Pete De Vries is asking if we can sum up why we love F1.
I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can. I mean, I can say with all honesty that I fell in love with it when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And it probably didn't hurt that my parents both loved racing. I was very lucky in that respect. So I was going to races at a very, very early age with them. And I'm actually, when Simon earlier on was talking about, he was going to Cadwell Park vintage bikes or whatever. And I have to say, I'm poles apart from that. I've always been very, very much, I'm afraid, a motor racing snob. And for me, I mean, there was a period of time when I loved sports car racing. I'm interested now, but there was a time when I really loved it, when it was pretty intense, when I was a kid. It was, and to Ferrari in those days, Le Mans was more important than Formula One.
Yeah.
But with me, fundamentally, it's been, from the first time really I was aware of motor racing, it's always been Formula One. It's always been Grand Prix racing. And there's just a quality there that isn't there anywhere else.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I was from the northeast of England, which is not really a racing hotbed, and my parents weren't into it at all, so it was from afar, and I was I don't know where it came from, but just cars first of all, and then motor racing subsequently, and I was drawn into it also by the words from people like yourself that were there reporting on it, and it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be involved in it. It's just it pulled me in. Yeah. So
And
that's
who was the first driver to capture your imagination?
When I was very young, Jim Clark, because I just I understood that he was from the borders of Scotland, which is not very far away, and he seemed to win everything. And so, I had Jim Clark's model Skill Electrics. Now I used to have a Lotus Elan, which I pretended was Jim Clark's and stuff like that. So, and I found out that because we at school on the playground, it was on a valley it was on Tyne Valley, and it was a big steep playground, and we used to race our cars down there. I had Corgi models, and I found out a way of that if you put 3-in-1 oil on the axles, it would go a lot faster, and so in my mind, I got Jim Clark a lot more victories on the scope as a result of a technical tweak. But the first guy who captured my imagination when I properly understood the sport was Gilles Villeneuve. As you said earlier, just the most exciting driver I think that's ever been.
Yeah, I think that was it, wasn't it? It was sort of watching Gilles. It was, like the photograph we were looking at earlier on.
Yeah. Yeah. This is just astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's worth holding up to the camera.
Yeah.
This is the Osterreichring. This is qualifying in 1980.
That's
the Jochen-Rindt curve, which was quick.
So he's flat out there. You can see the gap between the rear tyre and the barrier,
and see the tyres almost coming off the rims.
You can see the front, so you can see how much load he's got on the front tyre, because it's as Nigel said, it's nearly pulling itself off the rim, and it doesn't look like he's even thinking about lifting, does it? No. But yeah, when you watch the race, even on TV, and you watch for where he was, wherever in the pack he might have, according to how good the car was, he could have been at the front or the middle. You watched, and he was always going to do something. There was never, ever a race passed by where he didn't do something remarkable. Every time he got in the car, he did something remarkable.
Yeah. Well, I remember that year, 1980, Ferrari were in terrible trouble that year. The T5 was a pretty shocking car. It was a development of the T4, but it was...
ground affected, overtaken.
Absolutely. And I remember we got to Montreal, which was in the September in those days. It was unbelievably cold, and people were having terrible trouble getting temperature into their tyres, which of course Gilles got round by throwing the car around and doing it that way. But the car was so hopeless. Scheckter didn't qualify. Gilles, I think, qualified about 18th. And I don't believe I've ever seen a man drive a race harder than that day, in terms of just flat out from start to finish. And he finished 5th, I think. No one in the outside world noticed, but it was, to my mind, one of the great drives. Then there are not many people who would drive like that.
No.
Looking for maybe 5th place. So, as you say, when he was around, anything was possible.